So let's bring in Zeke Miller. He's a White House reporter for Time, and he joins us now from the White House. So, Zeke, you've been listening to the president's remarks. I thought the one thing that struck me as interesting is when the president talked about the relationship that the United States is going to have with Mexico. He says that they've been getting what he called a lot of bad dudes out of the country. And then he said it's a military operation. What did you make of that?
That's definitely something notable. It's one of those things where we can't really take that as a statement of policy from the president. It's kind of hard as a reporter to say that, but it's not a military operation. It's a law enforcement operation. The military will make that very clear. The White House has been very clear that they're not going to involve National Guard troops in it. But it does get the disconnect often between the president and the policies that the people around him are implementing. He calls Secretary John Kelly, General Kelly, a sign of how much he respects the military around him.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else that sort of stood out to you in his remarks?
I mean, just the casual nature of that interaction. That's a room that Donald Trump wants to be in. He wants to hold more of those meetings. We've seen of several of them over the last month or so. But, it's sort of cracking wise with these CEOs, telling stories about hole-in-ones, sort of giving them a hard time about, or grief about some of the products and business dealings they have with the federal government. This is how he likes to spend his time as president. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of these, maybe more of those visits to factory lines and things like that. I think this is a revealing picture to sort of how Donald Trump sees the role of the presidency.
Yeah, it's interesting, Zeke. I think that you're spot on about that. The supporters of Donald Trump and the people who went by the thousands to his rallies on the campaign trail really appreciate the fact that the president seems like a regular guy. When he was talking about that story with regards to the hole-in-one, he said it was pretty cool. President Obama sometimes used that language, but it does seem that he has a very friendly, easygoing demeanor, especially when he's in a room surrounded by other business leaders.
Exactly. These are the people that Donald Trump has hung out with for most of his adult life. He goes to cocktail parties with them, invites them over to play golf, have lunch or dinner with them here at the White House. Even he meets with them all the time. At the same time, that's been sort of the interesting dynamic around Donald Trump, for the last several years in public life, is that he's maintained that connection with his voters who are working class, the people who work several layers below in the business bureaucracy below these CEOs. He has a connection with those voters, and here also we see a personal connection with their boss's boss, and that's beneficial for him. It gives him a lot of credibility in that room because he has a lot of their frontline workers, support of a lot of them. The CEOs know that they like him, but also Donald Trump now controls a good portion of the federal government. He's going to be rewriting the tax policy, trade policy in the coming months and years, and these CEOs need a lot from him. So those relationships are beneficial sort of in every which way.
All right. Meanwhile, we've been doing a lot of reporting on some of the spirited town hall meetings happening all over the country. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer spoke about them at his press briefing yesterday. So let's take a listen to that and talk about it on the other side.
I think some people are clearly upset, but there is a bit of professional protester manufactured base in there. But there are people that are upset. But I also think that when you look at some of these districts and some of these things, it is not a representation of a member's district.
So what do you make of that? He said professional protesters. Donald Trump tweeted out activists, planned activists. What do you make of it?
There's definitely some of that. There's always some of that in protesting. But you also have, professional organizations that activate real Americans who have grievances before the federal government, before their members of Congress, issues that they want to advocate for. I think it's more along those lines. It's people who are newly engaged by Donald Trump's presidency. This is very reminiscent of 2009, 2010, those Tea Party rallies with the people people coming into the political system who really hadn't been involved before because they feel they feel that they have something directly on the line. Now it's Obamacare. Then it was also Obamacare from the different direction. And as long as that stays the case, I mean, this is going to be an issue for Republicans in Congress and the president going forward. They have to work, not fall into the same trap that Democrats and Barack Obama fell into in 2010 when you had sort of the big Republican wave the other way. They don't want that come back at them in 2018.
And these town halls come, Zeke, as Republicans descend on CPAC outside of Washington, D.C. We are awaiting remarks from several Trump administration officials today, including Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, and Vice President Mike Pence. What are you going to be watching for specifically?
What's interesting about CPAC is, it's not, it's kind of been this battleground within the Republican Party, within the conservative movement for years. But, whether it be, over issues like same-sex marriage, issues about, isolationism versus interventionism in foreign policy. But here it sort of faces its strongest, maybe existential crisis yet, sort of Kellyanne Conway said today that the conservative movement has been changed by Donald Trump. And, that's kind of an oxymoron. The conservative movement isn't really supposed to change, but it is. And it's trying to come to grips with that. We're seeing the cleavage between sort of the traditional establishment, traditional conservative Republicans, and the president, sort of the nationalist and populist forces that he used to get himself to the White House. And that divide is something we're going to be seeing play out on that stage all through this weekend and really over the next several years until that sort of shakes out. And that has a lot to do with, what gets done in Congress, the way that, how much political capital the president has, both in this country and around the world.
So Education Secretary Betsy DeVos will also be speaking at CPAC. And this is coming in the wake of the administration's decision to reverse those Obama-era protections for transgender students in public schools. Betsy DeVos released her own statement in regards to that change. Tell us about what you know about her role in the connection to lifting these rules.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, even the White House acknowledged that there was a bit of discord within the administration between the Department of Education and the Department of Justice over just how quickly to do this in the specific language that was in the guidance to schools that was released late last night. People close to Secretary DeVos have said she was uncomfortable with the entire endeavor of rolling this back, particularly given the president's comments last year saying, just let it stay the way it is on the transgender bathroom issue. At the same time, she went along with the new president. She was just sworn to the job a couple of weeks ago. She's going to go along. She bought into this administration's policy, so here she is going to go about implementing it. It'll be interesting to see if she brings this up on that stage or shies away from it, and how she addresses it. Does she want to get in front of the issue, both because she feels it's important to get her side of the story out to the American people? That would be her platform to do that. Or if she's afraid or doesn't really want to be associated with it and backs away from it. So that's certainly something I'll be watching for in a couple hours.
Zeke, as the president mentioned earlier, other members of the administration are south of the border. In Mexico today, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly, they'll meet with the Mexican president. The president saying that, he hopes that the discussions will go well, but he says that they're going to be very, very tough. What's the goal of these talks?
For the Trump administration, there's it's everything from the border wall to Mexico to accepting people who are deported from the United States who aren't from Mexico, and sort of Mexico being sort of a transit point to other Central and South American countries. That's something on the Trump administration's agenda. Trade reform, sort of reopening NAFTA. The Trump administration's problem right now with regards to the Mexican government is that they are opening up sort of a multi-fronted war with sort of the priorities of President Enrique Peña Nieto, from trade, immigration, sort of even considering that remittances can be part of some sort of enforcement package. That's sort of going to sort of run at and that's separate from also the president's rhetoric with regards to immigrants from Mexico from the campaign trail. That has stirred up a lot of discontent within the Mexican populace. So it makes it a lot harder for Rex Tillerson and John Kelly to sort of pick one or one specific issue to sort of highlight. They need to have this debate, this argument, this negotiation with the Mexican government on several fronts. And as President Trump will know, sort of when you're fighting a war that large, it's often hard to get exactly what you want on everywhere. There's going to be some give and take. This is going to be a beginning of a very long series of conversations.
And it'll be interesting to see what comes out of those meetings. But as we've noted in the past, the State Department has yet to hold a press briefing, so we're going to be anxiously awaiting that. Zeke Miller of Time, we appreciate the time today.
Thanks for having me.